So I'm a quitter. After 28 years, I quit smoking. The reason I did that is because I couldn't breathe. It was driving me crazy. I couldn't do menial tasks. I couldn't work in the yard. I could barely walk down my driveway without being short of breath. I couldn't walk up my stairs. It was just driving me nuts. And so I had to quit smoking. So I just put them down. I just put them down. A couple of weeks later, I saw a kid with some nicotine pouches, and I was like, "Hey, let me try one of those. Are those good?" And he was like, "Yeah, I like them." So I gave one a shot. It was all right. And I found a brand I liked, but it wasn't my favorite thing in the world. But then Tucker Carlson started advertising Alp, this nicotine pouch that he and some of his business partners came out with, I guess. And I love Alp, dude. Get Alp. I always I always screw up on the flavors though. So they have the wintergreen, which is what I use. They have the mint in the blue can, which is what you see in a lot of their advertisements. They have a tropical fruit. I've never tried it. I think I'll just stick with the wintergreen. I'm kind of like boring that way. I'm not gonna. I already have my order on recurring order, so I just stick with the same flavor. And if you use the link in the description below, you get 10% off your purchase of Alp. So go to the link in the description below, try get your Alp. If you order $70 or more, free shipping. I have it on recurring order for 3 logs. That's 15 cans. That'll last me a full month. That's right at $70. I get my free shipping. Boom. Alp comes right to my door. Actually, it comes to my post office, but you know what I'm saying. So go to the link in the description that says Alp on it. Go and purchase you some Alp and get your 10% off. Order $70 worth and get your free shipping. Set it up for a recurring order. You never have to worry about stopping at the store for nicotine again. I love my Alp, man. You got to get you some. Soon we'll be joined by Batya Ungar-Sargon. Yes, I said that right. I was so afraid I would screw up her name, even though I've heard it said so many times. I enjoy Batya. She's seems like a very genuine person. Really advocates for blue collar workers. I know she's worked with my good friend Gord McGill, who writes sometimes for her over there at Newsweek. And she seems like a very sweet lady. So I'm really excited about this podcast. It's going to be a little shorter than normal because she's on a tight schedule. She's in very high demand. You'll see her on Pierce Morgan sometimes. She'll be on Megyn Kelly at times. She's all over the place. So I really appreciate Batya taking the time to sit down with a bum like me and have a conversation. We're going to talk about Trump's tariff plan, um, what how it's looking nowadays, and what we think maybe the strategy might be. So I'm looking forward to that. It's been very difficult finding somebody that is an advocate of Trump's plan on the tariffs and that defends him. And so I'm excited to have her on because it's very easy to take kind of the mainstream view of tariffs and just fall in line with what all the modern economists are saying, all the neocon economists are saying. But she has a different view, and I would like to hear it. You know, she calls herself a Trump leftist, so she's an interesting character, and she, like I said, she seems really genuine, really sweet, and I can't wait to have the conversation with her. So stay tuned. I'll be back.
Sounds-
All right, as promised, here she is, Miss Batya Ungar-Sargon. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I was when I did my ad read earlier and I was talking to the audience a little bit, I was telling them I was like the one thing that impresses me the most about you is how genuine you come across.
Oh, that means so much to me. Can I just tell you, it's so funny you said that because naturally, as one of the few people who's like willing to defend tariffs, I get a lot of hate, and people will often like say I'm stupid or that I have a low IQ or that I'm uninformed. And I just want to say back to them, like, I'm religious. Like, it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, be smart. It says be good, be proud of your people, stand up for, your nation.
Mm,
Like, that doesn't hurt my feelings. Like, I don't
right.
care if you think I'm smart. So, all of which is to say, that means so much to me. Thank you very much for saying that.
You could always come back with Kevin O'Leary disagrees with you. So,
Right?
so
Yeah, he's pretty smart.
he kind of knows what he's talking about a little bit. To jump in, I wanted to touch on something before we got into the tariffs. I wanted to ask you. It seems to me you defend Trump a lot, but it seems to me you're coming from a place as you really care about blue collar workers
Yeah.
and that type of lifestyle. Where does that come from? Where was your dad like a factory worker? Like where does that come from?
So my dad's a neurologist. He spent actually a lot of time working in Indiana, the second half of his career, working with blue collar folks, like with farmers and with people who worked in like the steel mills. But I don't really know where it comes from. I think I really hate bullies and I really hate snobs and I really hate intellectual snobbery. And when I started to put together that the like most comfortable economically speaking Americans were not only making life unlivable for the working class, but they were like sneering at them
Hmm.
while selling out their children's future, even as working class people like just work so much harder. That nugget, like when I that was decoded for me, like I suddenly started to be like, why are all these very rich people on cable news calling people who are broke and working really hard racists? Like, and I was like, oh, they're justifying the fact that they oversaw an economy that was wage theft and made their neighbors poor while they got rich. Like, as soon as that hit, I was like, how come nobody's like talking about this? Like, this is the
Right.
most important thing to talk about. And I think also, like, as a Jewish person, like, we feel very grateful to this country because America is the only country in the history of humanity that treated us as equals from day one, pretty much, and was very good to the Jews. And so I feel this like very spiritual connection, like in the fiber of my genes, like to this nation and to the land and the people and the idea of it. And but I think it's more just like I have a disgust at the disgust that I see from these elites when they talk about the hardest working Americans. So I think maybe it's from there, but I'm not really sure. It's a very good question.
It was, yeah, I see everything you're saying. It was like they when they were telling coal miners to learn to code.
Yeah.
Like I was like, what is wrong with you people?
Yeah.
You know? It's just I don't know. It's so absurd. I'm
And now
just
they're telling the coders, well, we need H-1Bs, right? Like you see, like it's insane. It's
right.
insane. And
Yeah.
it's not like from like you could say, okay, it's benign, right? It would have been benign if like college professors made the same as truckers and looked down on them for not being well read, but they all made the
Mm,
same amount of money and lived in the same neighborhoods and everyone could afford a home and everyone's kids were equally safe. Like, okay, fine. That would just be like, a spiritual deformity in the elites. But
right.
it's that through that sneering, they oversaw like the squeezing of the educated into the economic elites and the squeezing down of the working class. Basically, you have a lot of people who work really hard and are still broke. And it's that makes it like a crime, like totally criminal. Like they used their contempt to disinherit their neighbors so that only they could afford to buy homes. So now they have less competition in the housing market, right? Like the
Right.
whole thing is just like, yeah,
Well, one of the things that Gordon and I talk about a lot because we're both truck drivers is that, when you look back to like the 80s, if you adjust for inflation, the average truck driver was making about $110,000 a year. And today, the average truck driver makes about $43,000 a year.
horrifying.
And then when I was driving over the road, which thankfully I don't have to do that anymore, but when I was driving over the road, there was this town in Mississippi I would go to, and the only thing they had there was an international paper. And so I would go there to pick up like those big rolls of paper to deliver to different locations. And I remember I would come out, and sometimes I'd be out of hours, so I'd have to stop for the night. And there was like a little parking area that I could park in. It was a little gravel parking area, and you would look around that town, and every business, all the boutiques, all the beauty salons, everything was shut down. It was like an economic ghost town. I often, because my wife's from South Africa, I often compare it to how it looks in some places of South Africa. Like the third world has come to America, and it's come to these small towns to where they've shut down everything and they've gutted out the industry.
It's so horrible. And like when you think about what the people who were disinherited want, like they just want the most modest version of the American dream. And you compare that to what the people who did the disinheriting have. And it just like makes your blood boil.
Yeah. So to get into the tariffs, I heard Chamath from the All In podcast. He was on Flagrant with Andrew Schultz a couple of
Mhm.
weekends ago, and he had made a great point, and I wanted to hear what you had to say about this. He said the Trump administration made one big mistake when rolling out the tariff plan is they called it reciprocal and they should have called it proportional.
Mhm.
And I thought that was an interesting point that he was trying to make there.
To me, what they did was they took a world that was based on this idea that the American working class should like bear the burden of everybody else's upward mobility, making the elites of the rest of the world richer and richer and richer, including the elites here, and get poorer and poorer as a result. And that, free trade was like this ultimate good. Um, and he took a situation in which America was the patsy of the world. Everyone had tariffs on us, we had tariffs on no one. And in the span of 100 days, he made all of these other countries relieved to have a 10% tariff because
Mm,
he showed them what he was willing to do
right.
if they didn't play ball. Like he's not just the mobster who sort of picks up the bat and has it over his shoulder and says, nice stock market, be a shame if anything happened to it. He literally was like, pow, pow, pow. Like show that he was not afraid to just destroy, like just take a wrecking ball to it. So that when he backed off and said, no, let's just 10%, 10%,
Mhm.
I'll stop hitting you for a while. Like, let's see what you're willing to give me in return. That is like revolutionary. And I think it's like we're so used to losing and we're so used to having presidents just in Wall Street's pocket. We're so used to having presidents promise things and then do the opposite that it's like we don't really understand what he was willing to do. And what it's not like in, usually in America, a president takes on half of the country's politicians.
Mhm.
And if you're a Democrat, you have 90% of the media behind you. So you're really taking on, what before Trump was a kind of like rump party. Um, but what Trump did was he took on both parties, because of course the rhinos hate this as much as the Democrats do.
Right.
He took on all the politicians, he took on all of the media, and he took on not just Wall Street, the whole of Wall Street, but the entire international global order and said, I don't work for you. I work for the American people. And like just the countries lining up to make these deals. And I was at a retreat where there were people who work for people in the administration, and they were saying like we're quite close to having some really good deals or frameworks to put on the table and say like this is how we're going to do it going forward. And I feel like to normal people, especially people like you, people who have seen supply chains up close, it's so obvious that like if we just put tariffs on China, they'll be like no problem and go to everybody else. Like you need a global association. You need a global agreement that we're not going to let China screw us over anymore. If we did it on our own, nothing would happen. Like this is so obvious, but to the elites, it's like, well, why did he have to go after our friends, Canada and Mexico? Well, because China's building car factories there. Like the most obvious things. And it's a combination of like, they hate Trump, so they have to oppose everything he does. They know nothing about how average people see things. This, I'm actually curious if you agree with me about this. It's been my experience so far in the last 100 days that like the people I know who have the least have been saying, you know what? Yeah, it might be a little harder for a while. Things might be a little more expensive, but it's worth it at the end of the day to have a better future for this country. And meanwhile, the people who have the most, like people on Wall Street, who will never not be rich no matter what happens, in the
Hmm.
stock market. These people will never not be rich who are braying and whining because the iPhone that they can get because it's produced by slave labor for $1,500 every year is going to be $2,500 for a couple of years. Like that's been my experience. Has that been your experience too?
Yeah, I think what you're witnessing is like when you come from the lower class background, the blue collar background, and you work your way up. I mean, I had good grades in school. I could have gone to college if I wanted to, but I didn't want to. I was tired of school. I didn't want to sit there and listen to more people lecture at me. It wasn't appealing to me. And I was ready to get to work, and I enjoy working. I enjoy working with my hands. I enjoy being out there doing stuff, but it's hard. It's difficult because you start at the bottom. Nothing you learned in school prepared you to be a sandblaster, which was my first job. Um, and they didn't prepare you for that. And then you start having children at an early age. I started having kids when I was 19 years old. I have 5 kids. And so you're so used to sacrificing everything. I didn't go to the doctor if I got sick. If my kids got sick, they went to the doctor. I didn't go to the dentist and take care of my teeth, but I made sure my kids' teeth were taken care of. I sacrificed everything to make sure that my kids were in a better position. So when we're looking at it and we're sitting here saying, look, all signs are that the next generations coming up are going to be in worse shape than we are. And I have a granddaughter, I have kids, like that's them. And it's like, okay, so do I have to hurt a little bit to make their lives better going forward? Well, I've done that my entire life. That's no big deal to me. I don't care.
That is so deep what you just said.
I mean, it's just a fact of life. I remember when I was married to my second wife, and I had 3 kids with my first wife, and I was paying child support on them, and that was around like $1,700 a month. I was driving a truck for a lumber company in Houston, and I was living in a trailer that I was renting from a guy for $300 a month. And we had 2 young kids, 3 and 1. And we all we had left to live on after I paid rent and electricity was $200 a week. That was it. That's what we had. That's what we did. And we made it. It sucks for a little bit, but it builds character.
It's just so deep what you're saying. And like the 30% of Americans who've gone to college and the 20% of those who have had everything handed to them and the 10% of those who have made it into the elites, like they fundamentally cannot fathom like what you just said is unfathomable to them.
I got in a conversation with a progressive one time about that entire situation. And she was like, well, that's what government assistance is for. And I'm like, okay, but they denied me government assistance. I live in Texas. They don't just give it away, you know? And so it's like, all right, well, I didn't get it and I still made it. It's not, it didn't hurt me any. I mean, yeah, there are things that I deal with that I'm like, yeah, this is a remnant of, when I tore my shoulder muscle when I was 25 years old or whatever, working. But you just do it and you just got to do it. And my mom would have never tolerated me quitting. My dad never would have tolerated it. My mom didn't graduate college. She didn't go to college. She didn't graduate high school. She still makes 6 figures a year. It can be done. You just got to work, you know? And so, yeah, when you have those types of role models in your life and when you have that work ethos built into you, you're not looking for a shortcut. You're just looking to better your children's lives. And that's what it's all about. And so when I look at the tariffs, I'm like, well, the way things have been going for the last 100 years hasn't helped us out any. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think people can fathom that. I think that the people that have the audiences, that have the microphones, that are speaking to large groups of people on the mainstream media, or even, some of these other shows like Breaking Points or The Hill Rising, these people live in these like kind of insulated, wealthy areas, and they're not exposed to people that have actually worked.
I think that's very true, but you better believe I'm going to be quoting this wherever I go.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll send you a recording.
So do
Yeah.
you in general feel like things are going well?
For me, yeah. Like life is great for me. Like I'm so much better off now than I've ever been in my life. And it's not just because of Trump. I mean, there's, things like situations in your life like change and all the hard work that you've put in. I've been working full time since I was 17 years old. I started off as a sandblaster when I was 17. I mean, that's hard work,
Mhm.
I don't know 17-year-old nowadays that could do that work, you know, but it's what I had to do, and so all that dedication and suffering and pushing my body to the limits, like yeah, it's paid off. I'm doing well. I'm not, I mean, my wife says we're rich, but she's from a third world country. What does she know? But she told me the other day, it was such a cool thing. We're sitting at the dinner table, we're eating. She makes like brilliant food. She's always cooking something wonderful. And we're sitting there eating, and she's like, I'm so glad we're rich. And I was like, we're not rich. And she goes, we get to eat what we want, when we want, and how we want. We're rich. And I was like, that's an incredible perspective.
That's really nice. That is that is beautiful. My sister recently said something similar to me. She said, if you can put stuff in your cart at the supermarket and not look at how much anything costs, you're rich. Like
Mm.
she pretty much defined it in a very similar way.
Yeah. And I think that's changed for me a lot over the last, I'd say, 10 years or so. That I can go to a restaurant and order without looking at prices,
Mhm.
like stuff like that.
Mhm.
And every once in a while, I glance at the price and I'm like, geez, when did food get so expensive? You go to Whataburger and spend $15, you're like, what happened?
It's so true. Yeah. So are
But
you still doing trucking?
I do. I work for a distribution center for a lumber company. So
Mhm.
I deliver around the Houston area, but I'm home every night now.
Uh-huh. Do you live near where you grew up?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of grew up in a lot of places. My dad worked retail for lumber companies growing up, and we moved a lot. So I was born about 45 minutes away from where I live right now. But I lived in Dallas, Houston, Miami. We lived in a lot of different places. So I spent, I guess, the majority of my memorable childhood was Houston. We were in Houston from the time I was like 13 until I guess we were 35 when we moved out here. So now we
So
live in the swamp.
I feel like Houston is memorable because you don't have zoning laws, right? So
Mm.
housing, it's much easier to build housing, and as a result, it's sort of like easier for working class people to achieve like the American dream. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would think so. We lived in Katy out in the suburbs.
Uh-huh.
So um, we had lived in apartments until I was about 14 years old. And then my parents were able to buy a house
Uh-huh.
finally. And they stayed there until I graduated high school. I was 17 just because of the way my birthday felt. And they ended up moving to Waco, and I ended up getting my own apartment.
Uh-huh.
And so that's whenever the fight really began. I didn't know what I was in for.
Now, did you
But
see today Trump had a new the administ it's being reported in Breitbart that the administration is going to require truck drivers to speak English?
I saw Gord had tweeted that out, yeah, and I know that's something that he's been talking about a lot. So I'm glad. I'm like maybe they're finally listening to the guy who knows what's going on out there, So
Yeah.
even though
So
he's
do you
Canadian, it's okay.
I know we forgive him. Do you feel that in general the administration sort of has blue collar workers front of mind and the well-being of the working class? Like, do you feel like prioritized?
Yeah, I do this time. The first Trump administration, I was like kind of iffy about. I wasn't a fan of Mike Pence, and
Mhm.
as soon as Trump chose JD Vance, that completely flipped my view on who Trump was. And I was just like,
Interesting.
okay, okay. I mean, I always found him funny, and I was never like one of these. Trump haters. I was just kind of like, yeah, he's goofy. Let's go
Mhm.
watch Shane Gillis do impersonations of Trump. That was like that was it. That was what I wanted. And so it was just like he's a silly guy. And I'd heard the stories of how he treated the employees at his restaurants and stuff like that. And I've been a UFC fan since 1993. I'm one of the few people that started watching it when
Oh,
it was still bare knuckle. And
yeah.
so he saved UFC. So I kind of had a little bit of like affection for him for that. So I don't know if you know the story of that, but that's an interesting story. I know Dana White's told it several times. So yeah, there's a little affection for Trump just on based upon those things, him handing out $100 bills to employees and stuff like that. I'm like, all right, he seems like a all right guy to work for, and et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't really know, I didn't really understand what he was doing during the first administration. I was kind of watching, and I was like, okay, he's not starting wars. That's cool. You know, I'm with the Libertarian Institute, so Scott Horton's always in my ear about,
Hmm.
no, anti-war. We got to be anti-war. So I'm like, all right, I'm anti-war. Let's not start anything for no reason. And so, but yeah, today it seems like he's very much there's a lot more focus on the blue collar, the working class and what they're doing. And he seems to just kind of like not care about what everybody else has to say. And what really irritates me about the whole situation is listening to these multi-millionaire media personalities that get paid, $30 million a year just to spout an opinion. I'm like, dude, I spout opinions every day. Like, just most people don't care what my opinion is. They don't want to hear it because it's like, it's there's this whole idea in society that because they have been granted this elite status by Harvard or Columbia or whoever, that somehow they're better, and it's like eventually you're going to get over that, because I listen to some of these people talk and I'm like, these people are idiots. They have no idea what real life is like, and I just laugh at them. I heard somebody the other day who was trying to make the argument that an income tax is good for working people. And I was like, listen to yourself. Like, just listen to yourself. And then in the same breath, they made the argument that the reason that tariffs weren't going to work was because American workers expect too much money. And I'm like, you're the same people demanding a $15 minimum wage for McDonald's employees.
Yeah, it's funny. They will often say to me, like, well, if Trump likes the working class so much, how come he hasn't instituted a $15 minimum wage? And I'm like, what do you think you can buy with $15 an hour if you live in Seattle or New York? Because it's not, you can't rent a
Right,
one-bedroom apartment.
right.
So it's not enough for there. But also,
Hmm.
like, let's say you're in the middle of Georgia, and you're working at McDonald's. Like, is that really a fair wage for somebody who, if they're a good employee, is going to be in that job for 1 year and then move up to manager and get benefits, hopefully, right? Like the whole idea is so dumb. Like the idea that, like, if only we could get, working class people in New York $15 an hour, which is what, $25,000 a year, then we would really have made things better for the working class. Like
Right,
it's so dumb on its face, but they
right.
act like this is a gotcha. Well, where's his $15 minimum wage? Like it's so dumb. I would ask. I think they do have one issue, and I'm curious what you think about this. I feel like the healthcare situation is just abysmal,
Mhm.
and it's like the one area where I'm like, yeah, why don't we try Medicare for all? Like, why don't we try some public option where people don't have to choose between themselves going to the doctor and their kids going to the doctor? Like I feel like I like a lot of what they're doing in the Maha movement, like with the food, but I feel like it's
Mhm.
not enough. Like I feel like right now the healthcare industry is very much it's almost like a luxury good that like highly educated people in good jobs get to take advantage of, and the whole market price is set to what they can afford, kind of like the housing market in like blue states. But that a lot of people feel like they're not getting access to like affordable healthcare. And I feel like if the Democrats talked about that more, they'd be in better shape. What do you think about that?
That's possible. I mean, I think there's a lot of problems with when you start talking about state-run healthcare.
Hmm.
You talk about people waiting in lines for months on end on
Hmm.
for basic surgeries. You look what Canada's done, and they've turned
Right.
to assisted suicide instead of helping people with depression and stuff like that. It's like weird,
So
you know.
true.
So there's like this kind of like this dystopian kind of like perspective that you could get when talking about that. But I think a big issue is when you have a $37 trillion debt, they're trying to drag down the deficit. And they're having a lot of trouble getting Congress to sign on to this because a lot of them are paid based upon increasing the debt. A lot of the lobbyists are giving them millions of dollars in order to continue their pet projects. And so
Right.
when Congress refuses to act on this, and we're sending the only reason that like countries like the UK or France or whatever can have this medical system that they have is because we cover all the expenses for their defense. And if they were
Right.
covering their defense budget, then their citizens would end up eventually losing all these medical benefits. And because we're spending so much money in order to allow them to have all these, social programs, we can't hardly afford anything,
Right. I hear that.
And
I think that's a really compelling point. I think I hear people talk about that about Israel. Like we give Israel so much money and they have nationalized health care and we don't. And I think
mhm,
people are starting to feel like, maybe we should like be really thinking about like what we're, yeah, and the idea of like having our allies like carry their burdens rather than,
right,
I think also there's this thing about the gap between the percentage or the number of assets of US assets that are owned by international actors and the number of international assets that are owned by the US is like $25 trillion, which
right,
basically means that like in exchange for like cheap toys from China, like basically we've sold our debt, which is like selling our future. Like,
mhm,
and they have artificially inflated the dollar, which keeps their currencies low, which keeps their people poor, basically,
right,
but also keeps our people poor because it means that the product of the labor of the American worker is not competitive internationally because they're paying their people so little. And we actually want our working class people to be making a living wage. So the whole situation is like so unsustainable at
right,
this point. And it's amazing like going into these spaces and like debating people who just totally don't get it. Like they're just like, well, but if they want to invest in America, that's good. That shows that they believe in the future of America. Well, they want our treasury bonds because they no, they want our treasury bonds because like you said, they're basically siphoning off of the power of our military.
right,
Like that's not fair and it's not right and it has impoverished our people
mhm,
and like, but they really they're so in denial about it. And there's just so much like you hear the weirdest arguments. Like, and I just can't get over. Like sometimes I'll be like, do I really have to respond to this? Like, why it's a problem that China, our greatest adversary, makes the ships we would need in order to fight them, or that like China exported a pandemic and we then needed to buy the protective equipment and
from
the
China, yeah,
pharmaceuticals from China to fight
right,
it.
yeah.
Like it's
Oh,
so
yeah.
crazy.
I'm sitting here elbowing books. Um, yeah, that is nuts, and it's also crazy that you look at like somebody like Mitch McConnell, whose father-in-law is like one of these. He works for a big shipping company in China and is in bed with the CCP or CPC or whatever they call themselves nowadays. I've heard it said so many different ways. And you're like, well, no wonder they're not doing anything about it. They're getting rich off of it, you know?
Yeah, and I think like maybe even more controversially, like Elon Musk, like Trump really gets it because okay, so this I think that the whole Pete Hegseth situation was actually about Elon Musk, but they certain people who wanted it to be about Iran, like made it look like it was about Iran. But actually the guys that they fired had been involved with leaking the fact it's my understanding that Elon Musk was about to be exposed to war plans that we had with China and shown slides, about 30 slides of like highly sensitive weapons that we were
Mm,
developing to fight China. And when Trump heard about that, which he only heard about it because it was leaked to the media, it was Trump who said, and part of my language, but Trump said, what the fuck is Elon doing there? He has business interests in China. Make sure he doesn't go. That was
hmm
his message to his people. Like he gets it that Musk has a lot of conflicts of interest. So people often point out that, 87%, 85%, 84% of the Teslas that are sold in the United States are made in the United States. But 100% of the Teslas that are sold in China or in Europe are made in Shanghai,
hmm
and that's the majority of the Teslas that are sold. So at this
Right.
point, Elon Musk's entire fortune is bound up with the CCP and with the largesse of Xi Jinping. And like the idea that that's not a conflict of interest with a lot of the organizations he was then tasked through Doge with investigating, who were investigating him for all of these things. Like it was really problematic, and I'm going to be very happy to see him go, and not just because he's been wrong on the tariffs and wrong on immigration, and like I'm very grateful to what he's done. First of all, he's been very good to my people. He's been very good to the Jews, big friend of the Jewish people after October 7th. And I really, I'm very grateful for that. But I think also, like, as Americans, we have to really be vigilant. And as people who are on the right, like, it's really important that we keep our house clean and not descend into like what the Democrats have become, which is basically like, a clearinghouse for the vanity of their oligarchs.
hmm
So I think that's kind of a tough thing to talk about because he's done a lot of good things, like with Twitter, where, it used to be like conservatives would get kicked off. There was no real free speech there. But then, he never says anything negative about China. He's sort of very like quietly, cheerleading for them. He'll say embarrassing, like obsequious things about like, congratulations on the 100th birthday of the Chinese Communist Party, stuff that as an American, you're
Right.
just like, and I think the fundamental question is like, if let's say, he became convinced that China could get him to the moon before we could, like, would he still be even, committed to the values of this country? It's very hard to say. So yeah, just to say like there's a lot going on, and I'm glad to see I think that the idea of like cutting waste and fraud is really good, but I don't feel like they went about it like exactly in the right way. And I think it's ultimately going to end up costing us more. We're going to have to hire back a lot of those people. So, but I think Trump felt grateful to him. Like he gave him, $250 million, helped him get elected. So I think he
Mm,
felt like he wanted to like repay him in some way. And interestingly, he's often said about Elon Musk that Elon Musk has never asked him for anything. And it's a very interesting like window into how Trump sees things. I guess, people
right.
are constantly
Yeah.
asking for things.
Yeah. Well, you can only imagine, that. Yeah. I mean, just me with this little podcast that I've been running for the last 7 years. Like people ask me for things. I'm like, who do you think, who do you think I am? I don't know these people that you're asking me to get you in touch with, And so I can only imagine when you have that kind of influence, you've been the president, like the amount of people coming to you with their hands out looking for something has got to be exhausting. And,
Yeah.
yeah, it's got to mean something when somebody doesn't want anything from you. The one thing about Doge that bothered me was when they let Vivek go. I thought Vivek was a voice of reason in the whole Doge situation. And he had a very interesting perspective on how to pursue the Doge format. And I think it would have been a little bit neater and cleaner. But I think so many people were so impressed with the way Elon Musk took over Twitter, dismantled 80% of the workforce, and continued to have the platform run smoothly that they kind of got this like fever dream in their head that he was going to be able to do the same thing with the federal government. And I don't think that
Yeah.
was a realistic point of view.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's 2 o'clock. I know you got to go. You got things to do. Please plug anything you got going on, any new books coming out. You're still at Newsweek, right?
I'm not at Newsweek anymore.
Oh,
I'm a columnist with the Free Press. I do a lot of TV. I'm on Twitter way more than I should be. I'm working on a book, but it's not going to be out for a year, so I'll hold off on plugging it. But maybe I can come back and we can talk again
I
and
would love
when
to
it's
have you back.
closer to that. Thank you so much for having me. This was just such a pleasure, and I was very deeply moved by some of the things you said. So I'm very grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Well, you keep it up. I love seeing you on Pierce Morgan arguing with Chank because I can't stand that guy. And my favorite though is when you're on Megyn Kelly. I never miss it when you're on
Oh,
Megyn Kelly. I'm
thank
like,
you so
I love
much.
it. Y'all two are great together. So you have a
Thank
great
you.
day and
You too.
be productive. Keep it up.
Thanks. Take
Thank
care.
you. Yes, ma'am.